So, really, the first stage of understanding who your user is in the sort of empathy process and design thinking is conducting basic research. By now, all of you have sort of an idea, a rough idea of a product, service, or redesign, something that you would like to redesign or design. So, where do we go from here? Um, the first step usually, or the first inclination is always to just sort of jump right into the project. That's what you're trying to do. That's the exciting part. You want to jump into the design. But there is a lot of groundwork that needs to be sort of laid, like a foundation before you can start actually constructing the design and prototyping and whatnot. And the first stage of that is really, like we're talking about in the previous video, developing empathy and understanding who your user is. And it's really important to do this because at the end of the day, you're designing something for someone else. So you want to know as much about them and how they will interact or use or do whatever with your design so that you can make it the best you possibly can. An important thing to note in terms of empathy and the role that it plays within design thinking is that design thinking, as we know by now, it's not a linear process. It's not, oh, I've completed this and I'm on to the next thing and that's it. You're constantly revisiting the different steps, and empathy plays probably the biggest role in the design thinking process because you will constantly be asking these questions like, is this right? Is this the right design decision? How will they use this? And so on and so on. And there are different ways to conduct this research. So let's say like when you're later on in the process and you have a prototype ready to go, and so you're giving it to users and you're understanding how they're going to use it. That's kind of when you start to develop things like user journey maps and anything else that's more so related to how the user will interact specifically with the product or service or whatever you're designing. And right now, we're in the stage where we don't have that ready. We're just kind of trying to figure out who they are. And we've kind of talked a lot about what empathy is and why it's important. So now we're going to talk a little bit more about how exactly to conduct this kind of research. So there are many different ways that we can conduct research, like we've talked a little bit about before, um, such as user personas, online surveys, testing groups, all these kind of things. But for the stage that we're in right now, and also the fact that it's kind of like a sped up process, right? We only have a few days to complete each step in terms of our classes and whatnot, we are going to solely focus on user personas as they're a really efficient way to sort of understand who it is. That is who your user is. And they can also act as almost like a framework or blueprint. So whenever you're making design decisions, you can go back and ask the questions like, is this exactly what my user would want or whoever? But in reality, they are sort of like an archetype and also like a hypothetical persona um, of who your ideal, I guess, customer or user might be, or most common user customer they might be. So this is a pretty great example of a user persona. This specifically is this is a challenge that designer took upon themselves, and they made a little bit of a blog posting about it. But they wanted to redesign the Apple News app, and this is the user persona from that redesign. And it was like really their first step in everything. And so this is kind of what you're looking to create. And not in terms of visuals, I don't expect it to look like this whatsoever. I'm strictly looking for information. And that's going to be your assignment is creating one user persona. So going into some of the details of this, we start out with Adam. He's a front-end developer. So it's his occupation, his age, and then also his location. And this is not the most crucial information when developing user persona, but it is somewhat helpful to kind of gain an overview of who this person might be. And it makes them feel a little bit more real, especially with the photo. Now, with the bio here, this is a great way to understand who the person might be and how they would use your product or design. So in the case of Adam, he wakes up every morning with his French press and reads the news. And this is really exactly what we're looking for. We want to briefly know who your user is and how they use your design. If it's a brand identity and not a product, try to outline how the user would interact with the brand. So, how do they buy the product in the grocery store? Is it a product? Do they see it online or Instagram? Whatever it is, or however they might interact with it, whether it's an advertisement, so on and so forth. So we're essentially looking at an example for how they would interact with your design. That's really it. Um, or their motivation behind interacting with your design. This helps us understand their personality, and this can be written in like 100 to 300 words, whatever you think is necessary. And moving on, there is a quote here, and it isn't the most necessary thing, but this quote in particular actually does help outline Adam's belief towards the news. Um, yeah, in general, and it does help develop a certain personality. So it's not necessary, but it might help to understand who your user is. So on to the needs and goals. This is so that you can understand what they want, and it's pretty self-explanatory, but it's like what they want out of whatever you're designing and what you're kind of solving. The next is pain points. So this is kind of like the problems, and this is really the first step in terms of defining the problems, and why you need to design something better. So outlining how they might use it or what is missing, and those kind of problems that they face with whatever they're using now. In regards to motivations, this example is quite broad in terms of them, but it also helps you kind of understand their personality. So something kind of like this. And in terms of the personality section with Adam, it looks like this is sort of from like a personality test. This really isn't that necessary or important, but make sure to include sort of adjectives that go over the core attributes of who your user is. And so the last part here is brand affiliations. So in the case of Adam, it's all about his favorite news sources. These brands can really help you understand who the person is as well. In the case of user personas, you kind of are what you buy, and you are what brands you kind of wear as well. It helps you really understand why or who your user is and why they buy the products they do. You're also going to want to include a section for sort of what exists. And this is where you'll note who your competitors would be, and who your user might go to instead. Understanding your competitors gives you a competitive edge because when you begin designing, you'll be able to sort of see what has been done before and why it has or hasn't worked, and possibly how you can make it better. So in the case of Desiree, in your project, you're sort of doing a social media channel. You would want to figure out other social media accounts your future users would follow instead of you, or people that you kind of want to emulate or be like as well. In terms of Bestie's project, she's designing a multi-purpose portable table. So looking into the marketplace and list or show who those competitors would be, or just show what else really exists. And you can create this user persona however you want. Like I said, it doesn't have to look like this at all, but it is important that you include similar information about what was really just discussed. So good luck to you.